Hello friends, welcome to Tarun IAS. Today we will be discussing editorial from the Indian Express of 6th of December 2022. The editorial deals with the championing the global south. You can relate it with your syllabus general studies paper 2 with international relations. Subtopics are regional cooperation, India and its bilateral ties. Now the article has been written by C. Raja Mohan. And we will talk about that what writer has to say with respect to championing the global south and how India could emerge as the regional power and what are the new focus areas that India should deal with and how different countries are partaking in dominating the global south. And especially if you see that there has been a recent trend of this rising recent trend of focusing on Indo-Pacific region, especially major countries of the world and major groupings such as European Union and United States of America, they both have given their own Indo-Pacific strategy. Especially the Biden's administration has focused dedicatedly in the Indo-Pacific region. There has been a Quad exercise, the Malabar exercise, and there are various other exercises and regional forums that are focusing on the Indo-Pacific region and trying to minimizing the role that China is playing in the global south. And after USA and after European Union, they both have realized that how much ground they have lost to Beijing. So we would see in this context that how India can regain its foothold. But before that, we will also talk about that what has been the India's trajectory since independence and how India has regained its foothold and how India can continue to regain its foothold in the global south. So what is the recent context of the article? Basically, we know that on 1st of December 2022, India assumed G20 presidency and basically, it has taken up the theme as to champion global south. This has raised a number of questions about India's intentions. The first one, we would see that how India can dominate global south or how India can emerge as a global south. But the recent context is that how how New Delhi is proclaiming new ambitions ever since it has taken up the charge of G20 presidency. So what does global south and north-south divide in the world is? Basically, global south refers to the developing and the least developed countries. And in the north, the global north refers to the OECD countries and the developed countries that play significant role at the international platform. And global south, Australia and New Zealand are not part of the global south, therefore they have been. So there is no geographical divide basically. The global south and global north, they refers to the economic situation of the countries. But today we see that there are many countries in the global south that are emerging. And in fact, if we see the part of the global north, the Soviet Union or USSR was also part of the global north. So we would see that what India's stance was when India gained its independence. See, some of the experts, they expect Delhi to return to past. That means to non-aligned movement, that we do not adhere to any of the bipolar grouping. For example, we do not go with the China because recently China has been emerging not in the terms of economy but also in terms of the cultural, political, ideological, military-wise, etc., etc. And there has been a recent new trend with respect to polarization of the world in two groupings, and which we saw during the Ukraine-Russia war, that how the world quickly became polarized, and although there were voices that were raised against the war, however, Russia also has its own concern, and India also plays an active role in the global south, and how India can continue to do so, we will see it. Some of the experts, they expect Delhi to return to non-aligned movement, the third world solidarity, which was a major part of the non-alignment or which was the major philosophy of non-alignment movement. Some new partners although have raised concern that if India would return to anti-Western orientation, for example, the recent deepening of ties with the West, whether it's USA or other Western countries such as France, etc. Some of them, they have raised the question that if India is championing the global south, would it return to its older sentiments of anti-Western orientation? And Eastern partners, they have concerned that if India on this path of championing the global south, then it undermine or downgrade the new forums such as BRICS, and it would give privilege to the global south. So what has been the past policy of India? Basically, after independence since 1947, India had this NAM policy. So in the polarized world, in this bipolar world which was divided on the two groupings that were led by USA and USSR, India found itself on a path where it has to not only cooperate with the other countries, but at the same time it must embark on a path of economic development and cater to the needs of the people who have recently gained independence from the British colonial rule. So therefore, India adopted NAM and Third World Solidarity, which majorly consisted of the decolonized states. So idea of Third World War, basically it underlined that it was not only different from the first, the capitalist West, but also from the second, the socialist East. So it was altogether a different ideology, and we know that India in the year 1947 it adopted mixed economy pattern. So economy was mixed economy. So now, as we say that many of the experts, they have raised concern. So whether India is committed to universalism or mobilizing one part against the other. That means India's claim to champion global south does not squares with this policy of Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam, that is, world is one big family. So the writer wants to say that the new trajectory, what is the new trajectory? So according to the writer, no man ever steps in the same river twice. But many of the old slogans that were framed around the West versus the East and North versus South, they do not correspond to the ground realities. Today, we do not live in a bipolar world, or we do not live in a globe where countries are divided into two different groupings or two different ideologies. However, the ground realities are such that every country or regional grouping, they are aspiring for the self-interest, but at the same time they all are trying their best to avoid conflicts. For example, if we look at the Russia-Ukraine war, then there was a high possibility of this war escalating as a West and Russia war, as a NATO and Russia war. However, all the countries, they were determined to not escalate this war and let it have a bilateral issue between Russia and Ukraine. Even India also had this stance that Russia should not infringe the rights of a democratic nation. But at the same time, India was also concerned about, or was sensitive about, the issues that Russia had with respect to the existence of NATO when it is not needed after the disintegration of the USSR. And there are other reasons there for the Russia-Ukraine war. Because we are not discussing the Russia-Ukraine war here, so we will not go into the deep. However, according to the writer, the ground realities are different. So from the from the mains perspective, and from the interview perspective, a question is asked that what is the regional stance of India, or how India should embark on this new path, or how this new era is a golden era for India, or how India has this material and political will to embark on this path of championing global south. Then we will try to extract some of the important points from this article. Let's take the example of China. Now, China is viewed as part of East. However, but if you look at the trajectory that China has taken towards the economic development and emerging as a I would not say as a regional leader, but yes, as a regional challenge. Because India and China, they are considered as true strong nations in the South Asia. But today China is emerging, and it is posing challenge not only with its policies, but also with its military power. So in the East and the South, it is the second largest economy and military power, and it sits at the top of the global hierarchy, and at the same time it has deep ties with the with the West, for example, European Union. Now, what was the outcome of the old policy that India had adopted? So, India had this exuberance of radicalism, third world radicalism during 1970s, and by 1980s, most of the countries, they moved away from this so-called third part to the economic development, and they began to accept the so-called Washington Consensus on liberalization and globalization. So by 1980s, all the countries, they started to open up their economy to the Western countries, and India did that quite late in 1990s after the new economic reform or LPG reforms as they were known. So let us see briefly what this Washington Consensus was. Basically, there were the set of reforms the developing countries had to adopt in order to open up their economy or in order to embark on the path of globalization. The first ones are the macroeconomic conditions need improvement. There was a focus on the reform in the public sector. They were focused on the prices. They were focused on privatization, that means deregulating or removing the surveillance of the state and treating market as a natural. And it was a classical new liberal and non-surveillance. That means state should not interfere into the economy. What does the Washington Consensus says is focuses on the macroeconomic condition. It focuses on the private sector reform. It talks about the institutions. That means it is more focused on the good governance. Talks about upgrading and regulation. Market as a construct. Market not as natural. The Washington Consensus thought of market as natural. However, the post-Washington Consensus, it thinks markets as constructed. There is more social democracy. Not neoliberal, but it has moved to social democracy. There is self-surveillance or self-monitoring. For example, the market surveillance itself or regulates itself, right? However, still in India, we do have, for example, the Competition Commission of India that overlooks the market practices, etc. So what is India's tragedy? By the end of the Cold War, India focused on restructuring its economy and managing new threats to its security from the internal insurgents. So Cold War, it ended approximately 1990s, like after and with the disintegration and also with the disintegration of USSR. So India was mainly focused on economy and managing the internal insurgencies and cross-border terrorism. It also was on the path of discovering the virtues of the regional cooperation. So if you see that an organization by the name SAARC was formed. So regional cooperation was the focus, and also rearranging the relations with the major powers after the collapse of the Soviet Union. So this was the India's trajectory. India continues to participate in NAM Summit and various other affiliated forums in the United Nations. Promote the third world solidarity actually fell off from the priorities for India. The media focus is continued, it remains to be the Indo-Pakistan relation. The global south, it fell from India's agenda. Now look at the trajectory. India is losing its foothold on global south now. The nature of international relations in the developing world, it began to change when the world entered into 21st century. Now if you look at, China was never part of the NAM, but it saw global south as a big opportunity and it did grab that opportunity. What was China's strategy with respect to global south? For example, the economic dominance, Belt and Road Initiative, the debt trap policy, and also the cultural, political, technological and military domain. So in China started to work on these conditions, and there were various set of reforms taken by the China in order to dominate the global south, and global south, it fell from India's agenda. So what was the impact on global south of China's strategy? The first one, India has now been trying to come to terms that China is dominating or China is playing a dominant role in region. US and Europe, they have also realized that they have lost ground to Beijing and Moscow. and how their involvement in West Asia practically reduced their involvement in the global south. So that is the reason why, when in the beginning I said there has been a rising trend of focus on the Indo-Pacific, so as to regain the lost ground in the global south. So their prolonged penchant to lecture the global south has now made it hard for US and Europe to mobilize non-Western support against Russia invasion of Ukraine. So they are finding hard to mobilize the third world countries against the war, because third world countries, they have their own concern, and none of the major powers ever realized the issues that the third world countries or the developing countries or sub-Saharan countries in Africa they faces. So therefore a new trend emerges, which is about the self-interest, What has been the US focus? So if we talk about the Trump administration, so basically Trump administration referred global south as shithole. However, the Biden's administration is making effort to reconnect with it. Washington is hosting the African leaders to regain some influence in the dynamic continent. Over the last 2 years, it has also intensified its engagement. Now, Europe is also trying to find alternative to BRI, the Belt and Road Initiative, right? So there is Blue Dot Network, something like Blue Dot Network, that is being seen as alternative to the BRI, and trying to put fund for infrastructure, developing infrastructure in the developing countries. Meanwhile, if you see that China did take the opportunity in the global south, but now when the US and Europe focus has shifted to the global south, China is now focusing at the backyards of US, and that is the West Asia. China is now trying to exploit the traditional foothold of USA, that is West Asia, which has been named as Arab Quest. So what is the new era now? Basically, the new era comprises of the great power competition. The leaders of the developing world, they want concrete options and concrete solutions to their issues. They are ready to bargain with the people, with the leaders, with other countries, and they are ready to bargain with the multiple suitors. India has also risen in the international hierarchy, and it is also on its way to become the third largest economy. So what should be India's focus? So what shall be India's focus? India should focus on the issues of the developing world amidst the challenge of deglobalization and post-pandemic. It should act as a bridge between North and South. It should be seen as, India likes to see itself as a Southwestern power that is capable of building deep partnership. In order to translate these ambitions, India needs to have effective policy. And today India does have the material power and the political will to gain foothold and realize these ambitions. India must understand that global south is not a coherent group. Rather, the developing countries, they have their own internal insecurities, and there is no single shared agenda between the countries. So there is much differentiation in global south in terms of the wealth, in terms of needs and capabilities. Therefore, championing global south would demand more active engagement with the messy regional politics in the developing world. So I hope you understood this article. So we talked about that, what was India's trajectory since independence, and how, because the article, it majorly focused on the global south. So we were looking at the policies that the major countries adopted with respect to the global south, and we also talked about the trajectory which India had adopted since independence, and how now India should focus on the global south, and what should be the major activities that India must focus in order to champion the global south. So that's it for today. Thank you so much for watching Tarun IAS. I hope you understood this article well. If you want to download the PDF of this session, you can go to the Telegram channel. The link will be given in the description below. Have a nice day.